have the pleasure of introducing Dave Kappos, a friend, my former boss when he was director at the USPTO. Dave and I also sit together on something called the U.S. Chamber's China IP Dialogue. Consists of 5 U.S. experts and 5 Chinese experts to talk about IP issues in China, and it's been a pleasure working with him there. So we asked Dave to close out the session today and look forward to his final observations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and I'll be very quick. Congratulations to those of you who are still here, the few remaining folks in the room. So I would start by saying, first of all, thanks to the PTO and Mark and everyone else on the team, the folks at George Mason who put this program together. It's actually really fun for me, and I'm sure probably for others in the room, to spend a day talking about something that's so important, licensing, at an expert level. No sort of junior or amateur presentations here. This is all experts talking about very refined topics. I think that's great. It's exactly what the PTO is doing, should be doing, together with a great university that's teaming. So, most important comment, thank you for putting this together. The second thing I'd say, I'm going to put some words on what I heard today that are a little different from what I heard from anyone else, and without using too much hyperbole, despite this being inside the Beltway. I think that what the licensing situation in the U.S. boils down to is a crisis or near crisis set of conditions. And the reason I say that is because it has become far more attractive now to break the law than it is to follow the law. That means to decline a license rather than to take a license. We have come to a point where we are very comfortable doing the equivalent of walking into a car dealership and just driving off with the car we want, because we know the worst that's going to happen to us is that the car dealership's going to chase us down after considerable expense, and we're just going to have to pay them the value of the car then. We call that efficient infringement in the patent domain, but that's really approximately what it is. And so as critical as all of these topics are relative to licensing, I would tell you, I think that we've got a lot of work to do in this country to repair what has become a pretty broken situation, where the inability to get injunctions in many cases, where the invention, if I can call it that, of new damages theories like smallest saleable patent practicing unit, that's a fancy set of words all strung together, but what they really amount to is, I think I've got a way to devalue patents so that I can just use other people's property and get away with it. And it's all part of a set of changes that we've brought on ourselves, so I'm not trying to put blame on anyone, certainly not the office, but as a country we've brought it on ourselves that have really devalued patents to the point where licensing is just not that easy to do. You heard a little bit of that today, and it's not that attractive to take, and there's lots of good excuses to avoid taking them. So I think that data needs to be put against these issues, and I hope that George Mason and the USPTO and others, I don't know if Alan's still here, but folks from the Chief Economist's office here can do some great work. I'd love to see the Industries in Motion study that we did back in 2011 or so, and is so heavily cited for the proposition of how important intellectual property has been. I hope that that'll get updated between the PTO's economics office and the Department of Commerce. I think that the government helping, this is something that we had toyed with and wanted to do when I was here, but hopefully it'll be something that the next administration can take up, trying to find ways to create a safe space for parties that engage in licensing and have licensing programs to be able to provide more information than they currently can provide to the government on a voluntary and safe basis, for the purpose of the government then aggregating that information and providing it in appropriate anonymized ways to research institutions who can do more work with it. we need to get more data out. We need to get data out on what's happening in license agreements, what I think is going on, that's become a lot harder to get them done, that it's a lot easier to take for free. We used to call that stealing. Right now we have nicer words that we use for it, and all of the implications on our country and our economy. I just got back from the IPBC over in Europe that was taking place the last few days, and a lot of that discussion was about how America's basically dropped the ball on strong intellectual property, and that Europe, with the advent of the unitary patent and the unified patent court, has got a golden opportunity to overtake and take up leadership of intellectual property creation and adjudication, and all of those things, of course, are the animals that create a licensing regime and a stable environment. If you've got someone else mentioned this before, if you've got a strong set of rights and strong consequences for violating those rights, you're going to cause folks to want to comply with them, to trade legally, and that's what causes a licensing regime to take place, and specialization to take place, and all the nice economic things that come from specialization. When the top of that system breaks down by having there be very few incentives to comply with licenses and many incentives to violate them, you get the opposite. The Europeans have certainly figured this out. They've now created a very strong set of incentives, and they're looking forward to taking over leadership. So I'll tell you, as an American, I'm a little concerned that 5 years from now, these kinds of conferences will be taking place in Europe or maybe in China, and the discussions will be about what they're doing to lead, and we'll all feel, kind of like they've felt for quite some period of time. So I hate to finish the conference not really on a high note here, but just reflecting to you what I've heard. Perhaps that's the strength of the American system, because we are very self-critical, and we call attention to our problems, and then we go off and fix them. I hope we will do that in this case. Again, I return to thanking the PTO and Mark and the George Mason folks, because it's really fun to get to immerse ourselves in this kind of discussion. And then also just saying, by way of closing, that there isn't any higher form of honor, of credit to a system than having active licensing regimes in it, whether you're a small company or you're a large one. We all need to be aware that in the fourth industrial revolution that we've now entered, which is highly standards dependent. You've heard a little bit of that today, but just to put a fine point on it, highly standards independent, meaning everything works with everything else. There's no such thing as any vertical value chain. Everyone's got to work together horizontally in order to, and vertically, in order to accomplish important end results, like automobiles that speak to the internet, like homes that speak to the internet and to each other. And to do that, we're going to rely on people collaborating, and to have people collaborate, they've got to be able to trade rights, and to trade rights, they've got to be able to put licensing agreements in place. So again, this conference is super important. We've got to get this right. It's got to start with a re-examination, not the kind we do here at the office, but the kind we should do as a country, of what we're doing with our intellectual property system and how to ensure that it's strong, or at least strong enough, so that folks in this room can go off and do licenses and put products and services into the marketplace. All right, thanks, Mark.
I should have known if I gave Dave the closer, he would give us all homework, but and that's good. So thank you very much, Dave, and thanks to George Mason and to Mark. Do you have any final words? I think we're all...
Just thank you to everybody. Thanks.
Okay, great. So thanks again.